film opens with Desiree, a woman who works in the adult industry. She seems erotic, and after signing off for the day, she takes her wig and mask off, reclaiming her true self. She then locks her streaming room and goes out to her normal life. The scene then shifts to Grace Miller, a well-known mystery crime writer who is promoting her new book. She is well recognized and proud of her career. After the event, Grace goes to the woman we saw in the beginning, Desiree, only this time, Grace calls her Kathleen, and they turn out to be sisters. Kath looks ashamed and insecure, but she welcomes her sister anyway. The house is their parents', and Kath lives there alone. While having some wine, Grace asks why Kath asked her to come and if everything in her life is okay. Kath used to be addicted to some pills and had a dysfunctional marriage. However, Kath now tells Grace that she has kicked the meds and is now going after her son Kevin's custody. She also tells Grace that she is doing better. She started teaching English at a high school. Elsewhere, we see a detective named Ed in a store getting some coffee, but when he is about to pay, a thief, not knowing the customer is a detective, comes in with a gun, asking him for his wallet. Ed doesn't panic and intentionally drops his wallet for the thief to pick up, but just then, he gets a hold of him and attempts to put him down. He does just that, and soon after, his colleague Ben arrives and teases him for not paying for the coffee. After leaving the store, it's revealed that the two detectives are partners and working together. Back at the sisters, Kath is finally telling Grace why she asked her to come. The two own the house together, so she needs Grace to approve for Kath to get a mortgage on her half. It's still not enough to pay for full custody, but it will help. She also thinks her husband is stealing from the family trust, so she is considering blackmailing him if she finds it necessary. Grace doesn't like the idea, and when Kath compares it with her writing books about women getting murdered, she snaps and leaves the table. At night, Kath stays in bed crying over her miserable life. Grace comes just in time, and the two siblings comfort each other in their hardships. Meanwhile, however, we see someone on an adult website stalking Desiree. He hacks her address from her profile, and it's a fan of her videos. The next morning, Kath goes to work, and Grace stays there, trying to write her next book, but she soon hears a chainsaw outside and goes down to meet the guy who is interrupting her morning. It turns out to be Detective Ed, who is on his week off and quickly recognizes Grace from her book. He goes inside his house and brings back her book, and the two quickly bond over their topic of interest. After her class ends, Kath receives a call from Grace asking if she can borrow a dress for tonight. She is now meeting with Ed for dinner, and it's already a date. Kath is happy for her, and she decides to cook dinner at home until Grace comes back. After getting home, Kath video calls her son to chat about how his day was, but her ex-husband Jonathan comes just in time to end their call. Kath then receives another call from the adult web employer. They want her tonight, and she must put on a show. She then goes to her safe room and prepares for streaming. This time, however, we notice that she keeps a gun with her as well. Meanwhile, Grace and Ed are having a good time on their date. Their conversation revolves around homicide and other crimes. He then takes her back to his house and shows her around. They share some kisses while fooling around, and Grace seems happy about it. Meanwhile, Kath has started her stream, playing the erotic role expected of her, but then we see the masked guy who traced her on the web. He is trying to break into the house, and Kath has no clue about her stalker. Grace and Ed then bid goodbye for the night. She promises to see him again, saying that she likes him. However, just when she is eager to enter her house and tell Kath about her night with Ed, she finds her dead, lying lifeless on her bedroom floor. Grace is terrorized and starts gouging her eyes out in tears. She then goes outside, and shortly after, Ed comes to her rescue. He tries calming her down and then goes inside to see for himself. Grace follows him, and he sadly assures her that Kath's pulse is gone. Soon the police arrive and they start their investigation. Ed is also involved in the case, being the closest to Grace, and he is surprised to see Kathleen's streaming room. Back at the station, Ed's partner Ben isn't so proud that they ignore their leave and work on a case. Ed tells him he owes him if he does this as a favor, and the two soon get back on investigation. Grace was called in for some questioning, and Ben asked her if she had any suspicions on who might have killed her sister. She mentions Jonathan, Kathleen's ex-husband. Ed also asks about Kathleen's clients, revealing that Grace didn't know her sister had been working as a dominatrix. Feeling unsafe safe alone, Grace asks to stay at Ed's house. That night, she sleeps on his sofa. The next morning, Grace wants to assist with her sister's murder case. They return to her home to gather her belongings. Inside, Grace heads to Kathleen's room and asks Ed how Kathleen died. Ed explains that she was specifically targeted, not just a random robbery. A flashback reveals the killer breaking in through the back door and attacking Kathleen while she was preparing for a bath. Despite her attempts to escape, he overpowers her and takes her life. Grace, familiar with many crime stories, understands how it might have happened. Ed notes that the murderer has a shoe size of 11. The detectives then visit the Fantasy Inc. office, the company behind the adult site where Kathleen worked, to request all her recorded sessions and a list of her clients. Elsewhere, Grace visits the school where her sister Kathleen used to teach. At the school, she meets some of Kathleen's students and the principal, who expresses deep sadness about Kathleen's death. An officer named Billy arrives with a box of Kathleen's belongings from her locker. Grace looks through the items and finds a confidential document that catches her interest. As Grace leaves the school, she encounters a student named Gerald Baxter, who claims to be the son of a senator. He seems nervous and asks about Kathleen's death. Gerald mentions that Kathleen argued with a janitor named Billy recently. Grace tells him not to spread rumors without proof, and Gerald apologizes before leaving. However, Grace's curiosity leads her to find the janitor, Billy. When she confronts him, he reveals that he knew about Kathleen's secret job on the Fantasy Inc. website. His cousin works there and recognized Kathleen's voice during a recording. He had warned her to be careful, but she got angry at him for recognizing her. Next, Grace visits Ed at the police station and shares what she learned from Billy and his cousin, Richie. She also gives Ed the confidential document, which contains evidence of fraud that Kathleen was gathering against her ex-husband, Jonathan. Grace believes Jonathan is responsible for Kathleen's murder and urges Ed to question him. Ed and his partner, Ben, go to see Richie to gather more information. Richie admits that he only told his cousin Billy about Kathleen's secret job. Later, Ed returns home and discusses what he learned with Grace. He tells her he doesn't want her to interfere in the investigation, but Grace insists that it's about her sister's death. Overwhelmed with emotion, Grace breaks down and cries in Ed's arms, and they share a kiss. Meanwhile, a man is seen watching another dominatrix named Roxanne while she streams online. This same man, who had previously stalked Desiree, is now watching Roxanne.
Is that how you like it?
Soon after, Ed receives a call about a murder case involving Roxanne, whose real name is Carol Hayes. She was killed during her streaming performance, and it appears the same person who killed Kathleen is responsible, as both victims had a shoe size of 11. Grace confronts Jonathan about her suspicions regarding Kathleen's murder and the fraud documents. Jonathan reacts angrily, calling Kathleen an irresponsible hooker, which makes Grace furious, and she punches him. He leaves, claiming to be the grieving husband and saying he will attend the funeral. At the funeral, many people gather, including Ed and Jonathan. After the ceremony, Grace tells Ed again that she believes Jonathan is the killer, but Ed dismisses her concerns and walks away. Grace then meets Gerald, who is looking at Kathleen's body, and Gerald's mother, the senator, arrives, asking Grace to forgive her son for his curiosity. Back at home, Grace reads condolence cards and finds one that says Desiree is now where she belongs. This prompts her to go to the police station and ask the captain to let her help with the case, as she has experience in solving crimes. The captain is hesitant but eventually agrees and tells Ed to give Grace the access she needs. Through their investigation, they discover that the card came from a rose sent to the church. They follow the address linked to the credit card used to order the flowers, which belongs to Rand Morgan's father, one of Kathleen's students. Rand fits the profile of the suspect, but his father claims he was home during the murder. Grace becomes suspicious of Rand because he mentions that Kathleen was tough on him, but they leave without evidence. Soon after, another dominatrix named Bethany is attacked. Luckily, she fights back and injures the attacker on his right hand after struggling to defend herself. Ed, Ben and the captain rush to the crime scene, and Bethany describes the attacker as a teenager wearing a fancy gold watch. This leads Ed and his team back to Rand's house, where they find evidence linking him to the Fantasy 𝐂𝐴 website, including shoes and a wound on his hand. Rand claims he was at the park during the attack, but they bring him in as a suspect. Hearing this, Grace seeks out Billy to see if he knows anything else. Billy reveals that Richie and Rand are dating, but want to keep it secret. Grace rushes to the police station to tell Ed, Ben, and the captain that Rand is not the killer. She points out that the blood on the knife used to attack the culprit was not Rand's. Grace then meets with the owner of Fantasy Inc. to discuss Desiree's character. The owner mentions that they are struggling to find someone to replace Desiree, as clients miss her. This gives Grace the idea to pose as Desiree to catch the real killer. That night, Grace meets Ed at his house. Ed expresses his worries about her involvement in the case, fearing for her safety. They end up sharing a romantic night. The next morning, they receive a message about a meeting. At the meeting, Ed reveals that Jonathan is involved in illegal investments, which could be linked to Kathleen's murder. Grace suggests posing as Desiree to lure the killer, and the captain agrees, despite Ed's objections. Grace is determined to go through with the plan, and Ed leaves the room, upset with her decision. Soon Grace began to act as Desiree on the Fantasy Inc. website, taking on the powerful role that Kathleen once held. The house was heavily guarded, with security and cameras set up everywhere to catch the killer if he showed up. So far, they had not seen any signs of him. The next day, Ed and Ben questioned students at the school for more information, but none of them could provide any helpful details. Later, during a martial arts class, Rand and Gerald got into a fight. Gerald managed to defeat Rand. Afterward, in the locker room, they clashed again when Rand realized that Gerald was obsessed with Kathleen. This made Gerald angry, and he attacked Rand, leaving him seriously hurt.
I saw the way you looked at her.
Soon after, Ed and Ben learned that Rand was now in the ICU because of Gerald's attack. They rushed to see Rand, who explained that Gerald had become furious when Rand mentioned that Kathleen was secretly Desiree. This made Ed and Ben realize that the evidence they had been gathering was pointing toward Gerald, the senator's son. Meanwhile, Gerald was having dinner with his mother, who was worried about how he was coping after Kathleen's death. Gerald reassured her that he was fine and no longer sad. Just then, the captain visited Grace, who was getting ready to perform. He told her that they had discovered the true culprit, Gerald Baxter. They had enough evidence to arrest him. Ed and the other officers went to Senator Baxter's house to arrest Gerald, but when they got there, he was not in his room. Instead, they found his computer, which showed the adult site where Grace's video was being streamed. Back at Grace's place, she heard someone breaking in. It was Gerald, who had come to kill her. Although she was scared, she was not surprised. Grace confronted Gerald, telling him that he loved Kathleen because she was kind and nurturing, unlike his mother. But when Kathleen started acting as Desiree, he became angry because he felt she was just like his mother. Gerald confessed this and threatened to kill Grace as well. However, he didn't realize that Grace was recording him with the webcam in the room. This evidence would be crucial since it was a live stream. When Gerald realized he was being recorded, he attacked Grace, trying to kill her. They struggled a lot, and during the fight, a gun that Kathleen had hidden in the room fell to the ground. Grace tried to grab it, but just as Gerald was about to catch her, Ed burst in and shot Gerald dead. He had saved Grace just in time. The film ends with Grace and Ed the next day at Ed's house, happily spending time together and making plans for their future. Did this story spook you out? Let us know in the comments below. For more horror movie recaps, subscribe to our channel and we will see you in the next one. Fear awaits you.